Let me ask you something. Have you ever bought something, felt good for a moment, and then thought, why did I do that? You didn't need it. It didn't really improve your life. But somehow you still spent the money. Now here's the part most people don't realize. King Solomon warned about this thousands of years ago. Not about credit cards, not about Amazon, but about how the mind should think before money leaves your hand. In this video, I'm going to show you how Solomon taught people to think before spending, and why this way of thinking is the difference between peace and constant financial stress. If this kind of wisdom helps you, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me until the end, because the last lesson might completely change how you spend money starting today. Now let's go back to Solomon. Most people assume that biblical wisdom about money is restrictive, like it's always saying don't, stop, or avoid. But Solomon didn't teach fear around money. He taught clarity. Solomon never said spending was the problem. What he warned against was spending without thinking. If Solomon were alive today, he wouldn't be shocked by credit cards or online shopping. What would concern him is how fast decisions are made, how little space there is between desire and action, because in his teachings, that space is everything. In Proverbs, Solomon constantly contrasts two types of people, the wise and the foolish, and the differences in income, luck, or opportunity. It's thinking. The foolish person reacts. The wise person pauses. Modern culture celebrates speed. Buy now. Click now. Upgrade now. Solomon believed speed is dangerous when wisdom isn't present. He understood that when decisions are rushed, consequences are usually ignored. Here's something most people miss. Solomon didn't believe wisdom shows up after a mistake. He believed wisdom's job is to interrupt the mistake before it happens. That's why he emphasized reflection. Not deep meditation, just a moment of awareness. A pause long enough to ask, is this decision leading me somewhere, or just making me feel better right now? Solomon knew that most bad spending decisions aren't planned. They're emotional. They come from stress, boredom, comparison, or the quiet pressure to keep up with others. And emotions, while powerful, are terrible financial advisors. He warned that when emotions lead, money follows blindly. This is why he taught self-control, not as deprivation, but as protection. Self-control, to Solomon, wasn't about saying no to everything. It was about saying yes on purpose. Think about how often people say, I don't know where my money goes. Solomon would say that money always knows where it's going. It's the mind that wasn't paying attention. He believed every dollar is preceded by a thought, and if that thought isn't examined, money will always drift toward impulse instead of intention. The wise person, in Solomon's view, doesn't ask, can I buy this? They ask, should I buy this and why? That single question changes everything, because when thinking comes first, spending becomes calmer, less reactive, less regretful. Money stops being a source of anxiety and starts becoming a tool. Solomon wasn't trying to make people poor. He was trying to make them free from regret, free from constant financial stress, free from decisions they later wish they could undo. And this is just the foundation, because once you learn to slow your thinking before spending, you start to notice something else Solomon warned about, the hidden cost that comes after fast decisions. And that's where the real danger begins. One of the greatest insights Solomon ever shared about money is this. The most dangerous cost is rarely the one you pay at the register. It's the cost that shows up later, quietly, slowly, and without warning. Solomon understood something most people today completely ignore. Spending isn't just a financial action. It's a psychological pattern, and patterns shape outcomes. When people spend too fast, they only look at what they're giving up now, a certain amount of money. But Solomon taught people to look at what they were training their mind to do, because every unexamined decision makes the next one easier. In Proverbs, Solomon warned that small choices repeated over time lead to big consequences. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually. That's what makes them dangerous. Fast spending creates a false sense of harmlessness. It feels small. Just this once. Just today. But Solomon would say that just this once is rarely just once. It's the beginning of a path. And here's the hidden cost most people never calculate. Loss of awareness. The more often you spend without thinking, the less you think before spending. Your brain learns the shortcut. Desire appears, action follows, and reflection disappears. Over time, money stops being intentional and becomes automatic. Solomon believed this is how people end up earning more and enjoying life less. Not because money is evil, but because they no longer control how it leaves their hands. He warned that wisdom always asks where a decision leads, not just how it feels. Pleasure answers the present. Wisdom answers the future. That's why Solomon taught people to consider outcomes, not impulses. He believed wise people zoom out. They see patterns forming while others only see moments passing. This is especially relevant today because modern spending hides consequences extremely well. Monthly payments soften the pain. Digital money removes friction. Everything feels lighter until it's not. Solomon would argue that when spending feels painless, danger is close. Not because you're spending, but because you're not feeling the weight of the decision. He taught that wise people make future peace more important than present comfort. They are willing to pause pleasure to protect stability. And once you begin to see these hidden costs, something shifts. You stop asking, "How much does this cost?" and start asking, "What does this create?" Because every spending decision creates something, a habit, a direction, a lifestyle. Solomon warned that money mistakes rarely destroy people overnight. They drain them slowly, quietly, through repetition. And that realization leads naturally to his next lesson, one that explains why desire is so powerful and why it must be managed, not suppressed. That's where Solomon goes next. Solomon never treated desire as the enemy. In fact, he understood it deeply, maybe more deeply than anyone else in history. He experienced wealth, pleasure, luxury, and abundance at levels most people never will. And that's exactly why his words carry weight. He discovered something uncomfortable. Desire grows faster than satisfaction. The moment you satisfy one desire, another one shows up. Slightly bigger, slightly louder, slightly more convincing. Solomon realized that if desire is allowed to lead without wisdom, it never stops asking. Modern culture feeds this nonstop. Ads don't just sell products, they sell feelings. Confidence, status, relief, belonging. Solomon saw the same pattern long before marketing existed. He warned that when desire isn't examined, it creates urgency. And urgency destroys thinking. When something feels urgent, reflection feels unnecessary. And when reflection disappears, spending becomes impulsive. Solomon taught that desire itself isn't sinful or wrong. The problem is when desire is unquestioned, when no one asks where it comes from or where it's trying to lead you. That's why he emphasized self-control so strongly, not as restriction, but as mastery. To Solomon, self-control meant you were no longer a servant to your impulses. You were in charge. He believed wise people don't ask, "Can I afford this?" They ask, "Why do I want this right now?" Because that question exposes the true motivation behind the decision. Sometimes the answer is simple enjoyment, and that's fine. But often, the answer is stress, insecurity, comparison, or the desire to escape discomfort. Solomon warned that when spending becomes a form of emotional relief, money quietly turns into a coping mechanism, and coping mechanisms are expensive. He observed that unchecked desire creates a cycle. Desire leads to spending. Spending leads to temporary relief. Relief fades, and desire returns stronger than before. Over time, people confuse wanting with needing and urgency with importance. Solomon taught that wisdom slows desire down. It creates space between the feeling and the action. And in that space, clarity shows up. The moment you can pause desire, you regain control of your money and your peace. That's why Solomon believed freedom isn't about having more. It's about needing less. And once desire is no longer in charge, a new way of thinking becomes possible, one that most people avoid completely. Solomon called it thinking beyond the moment. That's the lesson he takes us to next. One thing Solomon made very clear is that wisdom always thinks beyond the moment. He lived in a world without notifications, ads, or one-click purchases. Yet he warned constantly about the danger of short-term thinking. Solomon understood that impatience isn't just a personality trait. It's a financial liability. He noticed that people who focus only on now often feel trapped later, not because life was unfair, but because their decisions never included the future version of themselves. Solomon believed wise people always invite the future into the conversation. When you think long-term, spending starts to feel different. You're no longer asking, "Will this make me happy today?" You're asking, "Will I be glad I did this later?" That shift alone filters out countless unnecessary decisions. Solomon taught that most financial stress isn't caused by one big mistake. It's caused by many small choices that were never evaluated. Short-term comfort slowly erodes long-term stability, and modern life makes this worse. Monthly payments hide the real cost. Easy credit removes friction. Everything feels manageable until the future arrives and asks for payment. Solomon warned that wise people don't confuse affordability with wisdom. Just because you can pay for something doesn't mean you should. Wisdom looks beyond ability and focuses on direction. He believed wealth isn't built through dramatic moments, but through quiet consistency, through patience, through decisions that feel boring in the present but powerful over time. This is why Solomon often praised diligence and restraint, not because they feel good, but because they work. Long-term thinking protects peace. It reduces anxiety. It creates margin. And margin is what allows people to breathe when life gets unpredictable. Solomon taught that the person who plans ahead sleeps better than the person who reacts constantly. Not because they have more, but because they've removed unnecessary pressure from their future. When spending includes the long view, money stops being a source of fear. It becomes a tool for stability. And once someone starts thinking this way, they begin to understand Solomon's deepest lesson about money, the one everything else rests on. Because in the end, Solomon wasn't chasing wealth. He was chasing peace. And that's the final lesson. At the end of his reflections on wealth, pleasure, and success, Solomon arrived at a conclusion that still feels uncomfortable today. Money alone never creates peace. Wisdom does. Solomon watched people chase abundance their entire lives and still live with anxiety. He also saw others with far less sleep peacefully at night. And the difference, he realized, wasn't income. It was how money was handled in the mind before it was handled in the hand. He believed money is neutral. It simply amplifies what already exists inside a person. Without wisdom, more money creates more stress. With wisdom, even limited resources create stability. That's why Solomon always placed wisdom first. Not budgeting, not restriction, not extreme discipline, but understanding, awareness, thoughtfulness. When wisdom comes before spending, something powerful happens. Decisions slow down. Emotional pressure loses strength. Money stops being a constant source of tension and starts becoming a quiet tool for building the life you actually want. Solomon taught that peace isn't found in having everything you want. It's found in not being controlled by what you want. That's why he warned against chasing satisfaction through purchases. He learned firsthand that pleasure fades quickly, but consequences linger. Wisdom, on the other hand, keeps paying dividends long after the moment passes. He believed that every financial decision carries a spiritual and emotional weight, not because money is sacred, but because choices shape character. Over time, repeated wise decisions build confidence, discipline, and calm. Solomon also understood that regret is expensive, not just financially, but mentally. When people spend without thinking, they carry quiet guilt and stress that never shows up on a bank statement, but affects every part of life. Wisdom removes that burden. When you think before you spend, you stop fighting your own decisions. You trust yourself more. You feel more in control, and control creates peace. Solomon's ultimate goal was never to make people rich. It was to make them free. Free from constant worry. Free from impulsive cycles. Free from the pressure to keep up. And free from regret. And if there's one principle Solomon would leave you with, it's this. Every dollar follows a thought. Change the thought, and the outcome changes with it. That's how wealth becomes sustainable. That's how peace becomes possible. If this wisdom helped you see money differently today, take a second to like this video. It really helps this message reach more people. And subscribe to the channel if you want more timeless wisdom applied to modern life. Because learning to think wisely always pays off. As Solomon reflected on everything he experienced, wealth, pleasure, success, and power, he arrived at a conclusion that feels almost uncomfortable in today's world. Money by itself never produces peace. Wisdom does. Solomon watched people gain more and more, yet become more anxious with each step. He saw others with far less live calmly, confidently, and without constant worry. And the difference wasn't opportunity or luck. It was the way decisions were made before money was ever spent. He believed money is neutral. It doesn't fix inner chaos. It amplifies it. Without wisdom, more money simply creates more pressure, more temptation, and more regret. With wisdom, even limited resources can create stability, confidence, and freedom. That's why Solomon always placed wisdom first. Not saving, not investing, not strict rules, but how a person thinks. When wisdom comes before spending, decisions slow down naturally. You don't feel rushed. You don't feel pressured. Emotional urgency loses its grip, and money stops being something that controls your mood or your sense of security. Solomon taught that peace doesn't come from having everything you want. It comes from not being ruled by what you want. He understood something modern culture avoids admitting. Many people don't spend because they need something. They spend because they're trying to feel something. Relief, validation, control, escape. And when money is used to manage emotions, it quietly becomes a source of stress instead of support. That's why Solomon warned that pleasure fades quickly, but consequences linger. The excitement of a purchase is short. The weight of regret can last much longer. Wisdom, on the other hand, keeps paying dividends long after the moment passes. He believed every financial decision shapes more than your bank account. It shapes your character. Over time, repeated unexamined decisions create instability. Repeated wise decisions build discipline, clarity, and confidence. Solomon also understood that regret is expensive, not just financially, but mentally and emotionally. People carry regret into their relationships, their sleep, and their self-trust. And most regret doesn't come from what people didn't buy. It comes from what they bought without thinking. Wisdom removes that burden. When you learn to think before you spend, you stop fighting your own choices. You trust yourself more. You feel grounded. Money no longer feels chaotic or unpredictable because your thinking isn't. Solomon's ultimate goal was never to make people rich. It was to make them free. Free from anxiety. Free from impulsive cycles. Free from the pressure to keep up. Free from the quiet stress that follows careless decisions. He believed that when wisdom leads, peace follows. Always. And if there's one principle Solomon would want you to remember, it's this. Every dollar follows a thought. Change the thought, and the outcome changes with it. That's how money becomes sustainable. That's how peace becomes possible. That's how wisdom outlives wealth. If this message helped you see money differently today, take a moment to like this video. It helps this wisdom reach more people who need it. And subscribe to the channel if you want more timeless biblical insight applied to modern life. Because learning to think wisely always pays off.